Everyone, welcome back to Operation Technology Security. Today, we'll approach the OT security problem from the attacker's perspective, and we'll see the cyber kill chain that describes the steps the attacker needs to take in order to perform a cyber attack. We'll apply the cyber kill chain on the OT environments, and then we'll also today introduce vulnerability measurements to understand how important the vulnerability is with quantifiable metrics in order to prioritize our cybersecurity strategy. When it comes to cybersecurity, every second counts. Every second that the attack goes undetected, you may have more data being exfiltrated, you may have more data being encrypted in case of ransomware. If you have your process attacked, then there's maybe some stealthy damage that takes place over time that you don't detect, and you have more and more of your equipment slowly being damaged. So any second you don't detect the attack, you may be losing thousands to millions of dollars. Currently, the approach of most cybersecurity teams is to wait until something is being detected. So if in case they find the breach, something went wrong and they're investigating, then they start taking actions. But this approach is not effective anymore. Attackers are so sophisticated, they attack in so many different ways and with so much stealth that waiting for the attack to happen is definitely a wrong strategy. So instead of waiting, we need to take another approach. We have to start thinking like an attacker. We have to attack our system first to find out its weaknesses, to find out its problems, to identify whether our responses are appropriate. When an attack, it's not the question whether an attack will happen. The question is when the attack will happen. So you have to be ready for the attack. You cannot assume it will never happen. You have to have a response plan. So thinking like an attacker serves also first of all, it gives you the opportunity to understand the weakness of your system, and also gives you the ability to understand your response mechanisms. How fast can you respond, to what extent you can respond, and how much you can understand for the attack itself. So definitely, what appears in the slide at the end, it's definitely true. If you want to defeat an attacker, you need to think like an attacker. You have to be there first. You have to find the vulnerability first and patch it before the attacker can exploit it. So this, in order to have a systematic way of thinking like an attacker and the steps the attacker would take towards delivering the cyber attack, there's this model that we call cyber kill chain. And the cyber kill chain is a way to understand the sequence of events involved in an attack on the IT environment. So currently we're focusing on the IT environment, but that's also very critical in the OT space because most of the attacks we have seen start from the OT, from the IT, and then they jump to the OT space. So it's very important to first understand the attacks in the IT environment and be able to stop it there or kill it there. So understanding the attack can help IT security team to kill the attack while still in the IT space before it jumps over to the OT environment. And that was a porting of the kill chain that appears in military environments and developed by Lockheed Martin. And there have been many discussions about either replacing or augmenting this cyber kill chain. But we'll spend a few minutes looking at it because it's very abstract and provides fundamental steps that all attackers have to go through whenever they want to perform an attack. And again, the point of the kill chain is to break down the steps the attacker needs to take throughout the attack itself, and then we'll see whether we can stop and how we can stop the attacker at each one of these steps. So the kill chain has a total of 7 steps. And I'll quickly go through them here in this slide, and then we'll see each one of them individually in the next slides. So the first thing the attacker needs to do is reconnaissance. That means collect information about the environment in order to be used later in the attack process. After information has been gathered, then the attacker creates a weapon. Weaponizes means that it pairs malicious code with an exploit and creates a weapon that can be used for the attack. The weapon is being delivered somehow, maybe through an email or a USB stick, and this delivery will trigger the exploitation part, where you have a vulnerability of operating system, for example, being exploited for the attack to enter the IT system. Once the attack is in there, we have the installation step, and where you have persistence. Your weapon, your attack, is being installed into the system and stays there even if the system is rebooted. Once it's installed, next step will be command and control, and that's very relevant in OT attacks, because once you enter the system, you'll find that each system has a very unique configuration. So you need to send that configuration back to the attacker, back to the control of the attack, in order to develop a more advanced version of the attack, and then send it back for further propagation within the system. So command and control allows interaction between the malware and the attacker. And the final step, of course, will be to actually perform the actions on the objectives. So once you're in the system, what is your objective? What are you trying to do? Turn off power in some subsections of some sectors of the power grid, or destroy centrifuges. This is the final action, and last step would be actually to perform those actions. So let's start seeing each step in detail, one by one, starting with reconnaissance. So reconnaissance is all about information extraction. So you're trying to get as much information as you can. Are you collecting names, addresses, emails, passwords that are very useful, but even firmware versions, Windows versions, what software is being used exactly, what kind of antivirus are being used in the system. All these things are essential for the attack to be successful. So you get as many things as you can by targeting a specific organization, and through reconnaissance, you try to identify the weak points in the target network. Reconnaissance attacks have two types. The first one is passive reconnaissance, where you just listen. And there's a domain you listen to, you try to see whether they send some information out, you try to find things on the internet that relate to the domain. Maybe they've forgotten some files in an FTP server, maybe they posted something on the internet that you can use for reconnaissance, or some vendor connected to the utility is posting a success story saying we installed, we got a contract from XYZ utility to install our software and hardware to them. So that gives you information about the equipment that could be installed in the utility you're trying to target. So passive is just finding information, listening for information, and try to find it without doing actions yourself. On the contrary, if we talk about active reconnaissance, then you actually try to find information. So you try to access systems actively, you try to enter, to hack into devices, to hack into computers, in order to get information, much more information. And this is much more aggressive, because you really target something and you try to find vulnerabilities, exploitations, in order to get into systems and get as many things as you can out. And if you recall, Havex malware was actually doing active reconnaissance. It was attacking a system, it was entering machines as malware, but then was only collecting information and taking this information out back to the attacker for probably a second stage attack. So once you have information about the exact firmware used, the exact devices used, the exact industrial protocol used, then you can develop the attack, test it, and then send it back to where the malware is, in order for the attack, the final ICS attack, to take place. Reconnaissance can happen in many ways, and I mentioned already a few, like finding information on the internet, or actively attacking systems by exploiting vulnerabilities in operating system or router firmwares. But in a major way, reconnaissance is happening, and we have seen that happening in the real world incidents we have investigated in the past, is through social engineering. Social engineering specifically is the psychological manipulation of people into performing actions or divulging confidential information. In a way, you can see social engineering as hacking the human, as we see some people using that terminology instead. So you try to, instead of finding information in a digital medium, you try to actually get that information through a human. For example, if you're looking for a password, the password is stored in the operating system, but is encrypted. So if you want to extract it, you have to reverse the encryption, and that's currently not possible. So instead of going through the digital way, you can actually either ask the human for the password or bribe the human to give you the password, convince the human somehow, maybe through some impersonation or some other mechanism to give you the password. So since a human has the password in their mind, you can find ways of getting it without having to do cryptanalysis or reverse engineering of the encryption, reversing the encryption in order to extract passwords. So as a simple example of what we mean as social engineering. All the techniques that are being used in the wild currently, they're based on specific attributes of human decision-making known as cognitive biases. And I'll give a few examples, but then the next slide we'll see the specific categories of social engineering. One example is criminals posing as someone else. Someone, for example, with a uniform like a fire marshal that will enter a place, and once they're in, their presence, we have been trained to know that someone with a uniform has specific authority and specific responsibilities. So if you see someone dressed like a fire marshal, you may not question their credentials. So you won't go and say, hey, what are you doing in my physical premises? They'll just go unnoticed, and at the same time, the criminals may be stealing company secrets. So because there's bias in our mind that you don't really question people in uniform, criminals can exploit that, and they can dress up as exterminators, technicians, fire marshals in order to enter the facility, go unnoticed, and steal information. Another example of cognitive bias is the trust we place in an environment. So when you're in the company and you see a bulletin, you automatically trust that this bulletin will be placed by someone you trust as well. So if a criminal somehow enters the facility, and in the company bulletin posts that the IT help desk number has changed, and this is the new number you have to call in order to get help with your IT issues, then you won't really question that, because within the building, you trust that whatever happens there, you don't need to question it and try to figure out whether it's legitimate or not. So once you see the bulletin and you see that new information, you automatically trust it. So whenever you want to call for IT help, you will call the new number because you saw it posted within your company. And one more example that we see a lot is gaining trust of a target. So if you want to target a specific individual because they have a password that you're interested at, you can maybe contact them on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and then say, oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was someone else, and then you start, you engage in discussion and conversation, and you slowly gain trust, and at some point you start getting information out of the individual. So that's another way social engineering can be used in order to extract information. There are many different types of social engineering attacks, and in this slide I outline a few, and will also point out the ones that have actually been used to deliver an OT attack. So the main vector will be phishing, and phishing refers to updating private information that doesn't belong to you and you should not have access to. As an example, in 2003, some user received an email from eBay saying your account will be suspended unless you update your credit card, and they would have a link in the email. And people would think that that's a trusted email. They would click on the link and would post their password, their credit card details on a website not owned by eBay, but owned by criminals instead. So phishing is a generic way of saying that you're trying to get information that doesn't belong to you. And a subcategory of phishing is called spear phishing. And spear phishing implies that you target someone very specifically. So in the example I sent before, an email went out to everyone. And the attacker said, okay, whoever clicks on it, that's fine. Even if I get 5% of people to click on it, that will be quite a lot of credit cards I can steal. But spear phishing is way more targeted, right? And in that front, you're trying to target someone very specifically. For example, in the attack in Ukraine power grid, there was a very well-crafted email sent to the operators that looked like official correspondence from the Ukrainian Energy Ministry. So if you see that, if you're an operator and you see an email like that, it's not unexpected. It's not unexpected to get that kind of an email because this is what your job is. And the stakeholders involved in your job, one of them would be the Energy Ministry. So spear phishing, of course, this email wouldn't have gone to everyone, right? It should be targeted to the very specific operators, and it would be written in a way that the operators would expect to read that information. So spear phishing was used to attack the substations, actually to attack the operators, and the operators would open the attachment, and the attachment would install malware, and once, maybe they install the keylogger, and once someone typed their password, the keylogger would steal the password and send it back to the attacker. Vishing is where you create a voice response system, like the ones when you call your bank and you want to get some information, you first land on a automated system that says press 1 for this, press 2 for that. So another social engineering attack would be when someone is calling someone saying, please call your bank because your credit card has some problem. And you wouldn't give your credit card information if someone calls you first, but you expect to call back. And then when you initiate the call, you have way more trust in the interaction. So criminals have used that by calling someone, not hanging up, and whenever you type the phone to call, the other person is still on the line, and a mechanized response, an automated response system is talking to you, and you trust it already because you think you called the system. So there have been attacks like this, where this interactive voice response system was duplicated, and a fake copy was used to get information out of individuals. Water holing attacks are very important as well. This water holing attack is capitalizing on the trust users have in websites they regularly visit. And the Havix malware actually did that by installing malware not on the utility they were trying to attack, but on the vendors that the utilities trust. So, if you have you're using those industrial grade cameras in your system, and you get an email that a firmware update is available. So you go to the website because you trust it, but the attacker has placed the malware in that website. You download it to your system, and now you have malware in your system. So that happened with 3 vendors, one for industrial grade cameras, one for remote maintenance service for ICS, and one for industrial routers. Another attack would be baiting, where they use physical media and you rely on the curiosity or greed on behalf of the victim. And the speculation that the Stuxnet attack was delivered inside the air-gapped facility through a USB drive that someone found and thought it would be a very good idea to just plug it in their laptop. And there's an experiment that happened in 2016 showing how successful is that social engineering vector. A study at the university dropped around 300 USB drives, and almost all of them were picked up, and around 135 called home. That meant someone just installed them in their computer, and they were infected by malware that was notifying the author of the study that the attack took place. And the final social engineering vector would be quid pro quo, something for something. We don't have, even though there's a very high possibility that some of this has been used already in OT attacks, since they target a very specific individual, it's very hard to know whether this has happened, as they may not admit to doing something wrong. But as an example of how bad this can be, in 2003, there was some survey, and most people say they will be very happy to give out their password in exchange for something, for example, a cheap pen. So the fact that people are willing to do that trade is also a very important problem, and they may share something that's very important to the company, like the password to the VPN, for something that's for the attacker can be very cheap, or it can be some other kind of object.